What does the future hold, and how do you stay ahead? CTOs at Work offers a clear-eyed look. We will focus on what it says about technology and people. Stay with me, the best part is near the end. Chapter 1, Science and Alving. Jerry Krill, CTO, Johns Hopkins University Applied Physics Laboratory. Churches, Loveland, Mosca, and Natoli, Mind Over Machines. Jan-Eric de Boer, Springer Science Plus Business Media. William Ballard, Gerson Lehrman Group Incorporated. Amy Alving, Ph., is the CTO and Senior Vice President at Science Applications International Corporation, SAIC. She is responsible for the creation, communication, and implementation of SAIC's technical and scientific vision and strategy. Alving joined SAIC in 2005 as CTO for the Engineering, Training and Logistics Group and later served as Corporate Chief Scientist. Prior to joining SAIC, Alving was the Director of the Special Projects Office at DARPA. In this role, she was responsible for strategic planning, operations, finance, security, program development, and execution. Alving was a White House Fellow, 1997–98, serving at the Department of Commerce. Prior to that, she was an Associate Professor of Aerospace Engineering at the University of Minnesota. She serves on the Board of Directors for Paul Corporation and, previously, the Fannie and John Hertz Foundation. She is also a member of the Georgia Institute of Technology Advisory Board and has been a member or advisor to the Naval Research Advisory Committee, Army Science Board, Defense Science Board, and National Academy Studies. She is a member of the Council on Foreign Relations. Alving has a B. in Mechanical Engineering from Stanford University and a Ph. in Mechanical and Aerospace Engineering from Princeton University. She also carried out postdoctoral research in Berlin, Germany. Siegel, Amy, we'd like to begin with your journey to CTO, and it's my understanding that you have multiple technical degrees. The question is, given when you went to school, what motivated you to develop a career in science and technology? Because at that time, if memory serves me correctly, there was a glass ceiling for women regarding getting into science and technology. Alving, I am a very curious person. I like to know how the world works. I didn't actually know what engineers did growing up because my whole family was in medicine. So I knew a lot about what physicians did. We talked about that at the dinner table. When I got to college, I actually started in physics because I liked basic science and stayed a physics major for a little over a year while I figured out what I really wanted to do. I wound up in engineering because I decided that, although I like physics, I like the discipline of it, what I really wanted to do was solve problems. Physics is an important element of that, but it's a little bit more upstream than where most of our practical problems are. So I wound up in engineering. I got my bachelor's at Stanford. The summer between my junior and senior years of college, I went to work in industry as an intern at a company that has since been acquired and merged and changed its name, but even then it was a large aerospace engineering company. I knew I was just there for the summer, so I wasn't making career decisions based on what my summer job was, but I watched what the people with bachelor's degrees did. They seemed to be working on very small pieces of somebody else's problem, and they didn't get access to the big picture. I found it hard to be interested in that, and so I decided to go on and get a Ph. I didn't know in particular what I was getting into. At Princeton, I got my Ph. in Mechanical and Aerospace Engineering, and then I needed to decide what to do after that because I had kind of used up my earlier career decision. I decided to do a postdoc overseas to see the world and learn about other cultures. It's always a broadening experience to step out of your comfort zone. I didn't speak German when I decided to do my postdoc at the Technical University in Berlin. On the one hand, that might seem very reckless, But on the other hand, in the technical community, the Europeans certainly, and pretty much around the world, the professionals speak English. So I was pretty fortunate and could get along just fine. I learned a lot during my postdoc. I took ownership of a technical investigation and we made some advances and discoveries. That was very rewarding. In my personal life, I learned German, which was, of course, a great benefit from living overseas. Also, on a personal level, it was an exciting time to be in Germany. I started out in West Germany, and by the time I left, a couple of years later, I was in Germany because the Iron Curtain had come down. I had started in West Berlin and then Berlin unified. So it was certainly a very interesting time from a geopolitical perspective. It was also important to live in a different culture. Germany, being part of Western Europe, in some ways is very similar to the United States, but it's still not the same. I really gained an appreciation for the importance of culture, the differences and similarities. I gained an appreciation for the experience of people who move to another country. There's always a transition into a new culture, and I'm glad I got the chance to understand that better. Siegel, let's switch gears now and go to your career as an associate professor at the University of Minnesota. Alving, I started as an assistant professor on the tenure track, and I worked my way up. The environment was very familiar to me, because I had spent my whole life in an academic environment. So, in that sense, it was very comfortable. What was really valuable from that experience is the ability to go really deep in a particular technical area, to create new knowledge that, by definition, nobody has known before. You're adding to the amount of wisdom, so to speak, in the world. The intellectual rigor of academia is extraordinary. I really value the way it prizes intellectual integrity, the process of peer review, transparency around experiments and results, the way the data are analyzed in deciding what you can and can't conclude based on the evidence. That whole level of discipline associated with the pursuit of truth is extraordinary. So, to your question, I got tenure, with the rank of associate professor. And I enjoyed that. In my last few years of being an academic, I was actually starting to branch out. I valued the depth that academics afforded, but I also had the opportunity to work with and then later join the Army Science Board, which is one of the scientific advisory boards of the Defense Department. It advises the Secretary of the Army and the senior leaders in the Army about how technology can help or may not be able to help address some very important real-world issues that the Army or the Defense Department is facing. What I liked there was almost just the opposite, that it was very broad and you have to deal with the world the way it is. You can't carve off just a narrow slice that you're going to pursue. You have to deal with the whole world in all its complexity. And you're working on real-world problems that matter. Siegel, but what was the spark that caused you to leave the university environment? Alving, so at that point, I hadn't left. I still was a faculty member at the University of Minnesota. Service is one of the three components of an academic role, and in that capacity I was working with the Army Science Board. I was broadening my experiences, my contacts, my perspectives, but I was a full-time professor. In fact, at the next step of my career, when I became a White House Fellow, I still did not leave the university permanently. I went on academic leave, so I was not at the university, but I still had the tenured position. I decided to become a White House Fellow because some very good friends put it on my radar screen and it sounded great. The program is designed to allow people who are not part of the government to spend a one-year term sitting at the very highest levels of government as a special assistant to a cabinet secretary or senior people in the executive office of the president. I went through the application process and was fortunate enough to be selected. What I liked about the White House Fellows program, again, is that it's very broadening. It puts you into a completely different venue, by design well out of the comfort zone. I served as the special assistant to the Deputy Secretary of Commerce and got to work with him on all sorts of long-term, far-reaching policies on things that affect everyday life. It was a fascinating view of things that have a technology component in them, but were much broader than just technology per se. Siegel, so that provided you a way to transition into the real world then? Alving, well, real is in the eye of the beholder. But it was definitely broadening. For example, at the time Commerce was heavily involved in the policy of opening up satellite imaging to commercial providers. The discussions were about shutter control, and were we risking our national security, and how did that balance against the commercial potential? Those decisions have now played out. Now we have commercial mapping industries, like Google Maps, that we all take for granted. We were working on things that have a technology component, like satellite technology, like imaging, etc., but they also have a much broader play. Chapter 2: Time and Technology. We were also just starting up the decennial census. Every 10 years, Commerce is responsible for trying to count every person in the United States. That's mandated by the Constitution, and it's a really hard job. It's also something that by definition happens only periodically. So there's always a core census capability in Commerce, but every 10 years it has to ramp up suddenly for the largest peacetime mobilization the country does. I was fortunate enough to be working for the Deputy Secretary of Commerce when he was just starting to ramp up, figuring out how we were going to count all of the people in the country, including those who don't trust the government, don't want to be counted, or couldn't be bothered to turn in their census form. This is why it's such a difficult undertaking. If everybody responded to the mail-in form, it wouldn't be so hard. Census results affect everything from where congressional lines are drawn to where schools and hospitals are built and so forth. There are technical issues around the census, especially around statistical techniques for counting large populations, but there are also very broad policy implications. What I found fascinating was how things that have a technology core have much broader impact than simply the technology element. That's what I had hoped to get out of being a White House fellow, and, in fact, I had a great experience doing that. But at that point I was still on leave. Alving, yes. The White House Fellowship is a one-year term, and after you leave the fellowship, you either go back to what you were doing or you do something else. As much as I had loved the experience working at Commerce, I wanted to work in the government with more of a technology-centered focus. I ended up being the deputy director of one of the offices of DARPA, Defense Advanced Research Projects Agency, which, of course, is a heavily technology-oriented organization. I eventually rose to become the director of the office. So, Stan, to answer your question, after I had been at DARPA for 1 year, I left the University of Minnesota, and the reason for that in some ways was very tactical. At a university, when you're tenured, you can go on leave for 2 years without too much difficulty. But after that time, they either want you to come back and engage in research and teaching, or they want you to give up the tenure seat. And so I decided that I was having such a great time at DARPA that I gave up my tenured position at the university and remained at DARPA. I had been there for a year when I made that decision. Siegel, well, that really showed some guts to leave the comfort of the university environment, which is lifetime employment. Alving, that's an interesting point, and this was very much a topic of conversation as I was going through tenure. I've always viewed tenure as being about academic freedom, and lifetime job security happens to be the means to guarantee academic freedom. Around that time, there were conversations at the University of Minnesota and other universities about how to make sure that lifetime job security didn't turn into people being less than dynamic and energetic about their jobs. But for me, I didn't have to struggle with the job security part because that wasn't, in my mind, the purpose of tenure. And anyway, I was having so much fun at DARPA that it just seemed like a natural decision. I've never regretted giving up tenure, although certainly I had some very good colleagues and enjoyed the environment at the University of Minnesota. But, I was giving it up for other things that were also very good. Siegel, can we roll the videotape forward a little now and talk about the transition from a research environment to the SAIC scientific engineering and technology environment? What caused you to make that shift? Alving, at DARPA, the intention is to bring in the technical leaders, the office directors, program managers, and agency directors temporarily, have them spend a few years and then leave. A little secret, by the time I left DARPA, I had the equivalent of tenure in the government. I was a career SAS senior executive service, but again, I didn't view the administrative element that said I could stay there forever as determining my career. Part of what really makes DARPA special is that it brings in technical people, gives them a chance to make a difference, and then lets them move on to something else. Even though I had a permission slip to stay in the government forever, that was not my focus. I was interested in the broadening aspect. I'd been in academia and I'd been in government. There are many other roles I could do in either, but my heart was really in working in the private sector, and in particular, the defense industry, since that's where I felt I had the most to offer. What I liked about SAIC was what I now know, internally, we call our entrepreneurial culture. As a government customer, I had always seen SAIC come to DARPA with a lot of good ideas. SAIC took those ideas and had a disciplined process for turning them into solutions. And they had integrity. They really cared about solving the problem, not just about getting the contract. So I found those very attractive characteristics. I talked to a number of different potential employers, but in the end, I decided to come to SAIC fundamentally for those reasons. Siegel, okay, so as a segue to where you are now, was there a time when you decided that you wanted to be a CTO? Alving, the short answer is no, and I have to say that my career path has had a couple of stages to it, but it has never had a clear definition from me of, first, I want to do this, and then I want to do that, and then X amount of time later do something else. I try to do the best job I can at what I'm doing, and then pick opportunities as they come along that offer some broadening experience, that give me a chance to use the skills I've developed in a way that brings value, and in return, offer me the opportunity to do something different. So I was not looking for a CTO role per se. Once I decided that I wanted to work in industry, I wanted to be in a position that had as broad a spectrum of technologies and problems as possible. To me, that's been the constant as I've moved from one role to another. Going from very narrow and very deep, and being narrow is what allows you to be very deep into ever broader areas, looking at more challenging problems. Siegel, along that path, did you have mentors who helped you shape your career? Alving, I did. For instance, Wilson Talley was an early mentor, and he called me one day to announce without preamble, "Amy, you need to become a White House Fellow." That was the first I ever heard of the White House Fellows. Over time, he and other former fellows told me about the program. None of them had the power to make me a fellow, but they did have the power to open my eyes about what was possible, to help me set goals for myself and to think about how to reach them. That's why mentors are so powerful in a young person's career, because they share perspectives and expand horizons. When I became an assistant professor, in my first grown-up job so to speak, I had another mentor who was the associate dean of the college. He was extremely helpful to me in understanding, as an assistant professor, what's important and what's not. He gave me some advice that I think he gave to a number of high-achieving people. He said, "You have to learn to say no sometimes. You can't say yes to everything you're asked to do." He meant that you have to be selective about your focus, that you have to channel your energy into a handful of things where you're committed to making a difference. Because otherwise you won't get anything done. I had other mentors. For example, I ended up at DARPA because another mentor was coming in to be Director, Defense Research and Engineering, which is the position that DARPA reports to. He suggested that after I left my White House fellowship, DARPA might be a good fit. When I was looking for jobs in industry, I talked to other mentors about having a resume that resonates within industry or about specific job opportunities. So I haven't had one single mentor. I have had a number of people who have played different roles at different times and were really key to helping find and recognize opportunities and make the right decisions. Siegel, did that mentor group also include your parents? Alving, definitely. Since I was a kid, my dad played an important role in the way I look at the world. He implicitly conveyed a belief that the world makes sense and it's up to us to try to understand how it works, especially on the physics and technology side, maybe a little less so when you get to human nature. He was a key person in developing my inquisitive nature. I tend to learn by asking questions, building out a mental model of the world, and I know I got that from him because people tell me that. When you're 4 years old, you don't understand what's shaping you, but in retrospect, I realize he was really a critical factor. And my mom just had a passion and commitment for getting stuff done. She was tenacious, and some of that rubbed off on me. Siegel, so just before we talk about your day-to-day job, we'd like to ask you what you enjoyed most in the various positions along your career path? Alving, I got different things out of each position. As I said, out of the academic positions, I got the joy of learning new things that nobody else had figured out yet, the time and the expectation to pursue intellectual rigor, to really know what's right and what's wrong and to spend time sorting it out. In the government jobs, I enjoyed the connection between very high-level policy decisions and things that affect people's lives every day. And in the CTO role here at SAIC, again, in a similar vein, it's about how the company's strategic decisions end up affecting the direction of the company and the solutions we can deliver to our customers. Siegel, let's talk about your real-world day-to-day job at SAIC. What's a typical day? What are your main responsibilities, whom do you report to, and who reports to you? Alving, okay, I'll spend some time talking about what I do, but I probably can't describe a typical day. Alving, right. I report to the CEO. As far as who reports to me, I have a small staff, but I also have, throughout the company, a network of CTOs at several levels, from the groups down to the business units, and sometimes, depending on how strong the technology focus is within an organization, there may be CTOs at further subdivisions. All the CTOs together play related roles, although each is a little bit different depending on the level. As the corporate CTO, I spend a lot of time on the strategy. In particular, I work with the group CTOs as part of our strategic planning process, the Integrated Business Planning Process, or IBPP. It takes a very disciplined approach to identifying the strategic directions for the company. Once those strategic directions are identified, then we as CTOs need to figure out what that really means. What are the technology imperatives? What technologies do we need to own, or be masters of, or where do we need to work with others if we want to execute that strategy? Then we assess where we stand today, relative to those aspirations. That defines the gaps, and we have to figure out how we are going to fill the gaps, whether it's by hiring or technology development or teaming agreements or acquisitions or whatever the right tactic may be. The group CTOs tend to be strong leaders in this part of the cycle. The answers to these questions fold into the annual operating plan, which includes things like investment portfolios for technology development, a strategic roadmap of potential acquisition targets, etc., etc. And then as the fiscal year begins, the plans shift into execution and the business unit CTOs play a lead role for their parts of the business. Chapter 3: Technology and Company. As execution issues start to cross business units, the groups will be involved. As they start to cross groups, then the corporate CTO will be involved. So, for example, I would be directly involved with an acquisition if it's of strategic importance across the company. For smaller acquisitions, the chief technology officers at the appropriate levels are more involved in doing the due diligence, looking at the technology, and so on. At my level as the corporate chief technology officer, in the spectrum from strategy to execution, I spend a lot more of my time on the strategy. As you go through the levels of the organization, the CTOs shift the mix of how they spend their time. Some of the CTOs, as you go down in the organization, are not full-time CTOs. They may be on direct jobs in some cases, or they may wear a couple of hats, doing a mix of technology, strategy, and business development for their part of the organization. So there really is not a one-size-fits-all solution in the company, because this is not a one-size-fits-all place. As you know, it's a very complex organization. We do lots of things for lots of different customers. Donaldson, and it reflects in part, too, the collegial nature of an academic setting, because sometimes you have to get very deep and narrow. Donaldson, fortunately, there are places where you can go to do that. Alving, so that brings me to another key role of the CTOs, and, again, this plays out differently at different levels. And that is synchronizing the technology, both the technology development efforts, and the technology capabilities we already have, synchronizing those across the different parts of the company. So, for instance, if we have technology that exists in one part of the company that is needed by a customer served by another part of the company, the CTO network is critical in making sure that we get that capability transferred from point A to point B. We have a strong focus on collaboration within the company. We recognize that the simple act of what we call cross-selling, taking something we've developed for one customer or one market and selling it to a different customer or a different market, is a really important way to leverage one of SAIC's strengths. That strength is our incredible breadth of technologies, of capabilities, etc. So the CTOs have to be involved in recognizing what technologies exist and what may be useful to others. Alving, another area where the technologists are important is in developing new solutions that rely on the expertise of many different parts of the company. In that case, it's the CTOs who recognize who has what capabilities, what are the gaps, and who can stitch it all together into a solution. An example of that is what we're doing in the next generation of information technology, and in particular what we're doing in designing, developing, building, and instantiating a secure private cloud. These are fundamentally technology issues, and the expertise to do that comes from across the company. The CTOs are figuring out what that solution should look like, where our technical capabilities are, and what we need to do in terms of development to actually instantiate that. And so the CTOs, again, play a really important role in connecting our aspirations to what we're actually producing today. Siegel, okay, now you've been a CTO at SAIC for how many years? Siegel, how does your role during that period of time match with the expectations you had before coming on board? Alving, I'd say it's consistent with it, but doing the job now day to day, I have a much better understanding of what the job really is. You asked, is it management, administrative, communication? Yeah, it's all of those things. In fact, I like to tell technologists that life is a lot more about communication than many of us who were raised doing problem sets necessarily appreciate. You can't do management or technology without being a good communicator. It's an undervalued skill. It's critical, for instance, to be able to talk across the company, to bring networks together, to get people speaking in the same language, understanding the same problem, not talking past each other. Communication is one of the most important skills. It's not what we think of as a core for technologists, but I think that's a mistake. Siegel, when you came on board to take this position, was this collaboration role and this ability to facilitate communication part of the job description? Alving, SAIC has been on a journey about collaboration. Historically, our company was maybe not as integrated as it is today. So over the last several years, we've really been focused on how we do a better job of collaboration within the company. I think we've been making great strides there. We've changed the mindset, we've changed the expectations of our leaders, and people have seen the benefit of that. So I think we're a much more collaborative organization than we've been in the past. We're also changing some of our internal processes. For example, one of the ways I work with the CIO is on information technology systems that allow us to do a better job of sharing our electronic documents internally. In the outside world, we have things like Facebook and so forth. Those are great, but they're not appropriate for a company that not only has proprietary data but also has customer data that's very sensitive, and not everybody within the company is allowed to see everything that people have. So we have to be very thoughtful about the way we collaborate and share electronic documents. As the CTO, I'm the executive sponsor of our initiative to do a better job of spreading internal awareness about our broad capabilities. I partner with our CIO, who's converting our IT systems to allow us to share documents within the constraints that are appropriate to an enterprise as complex as SAIC. Donaldson, in the 4 years that you've had this role, there's a lot of change and the CTO role has evolved. It's becoming more visible in the organization. Do you see a continuation of that as SAIC moves forward and gets more disciplined in the business planning process, investment processes, and linking those processes together going forward? Alving, I do see that role as becoming, as you say, more visible and more integrated. Just the fact that we have a clearly defined planning process means that the opportunities for engagement are very well defined, and that engagement by the CTOs is a necessary thing to keep that process moving along. SAIC has been on a journey throughout its existence. Early on, it was a number of essentially small organizations that each grew up locally around a customer, solving that customer's needs, and doing an excellent job of that. As the company grew in scale, those independent organizations started to bump into each other and merge, and now that we are such a large company, we're operating differently. Articulating a strategic direction and having the technology to back it up resonates within a company focused on science applications. These things are critical to our future, so it's an exciting time to be a CTO. Siegel, despite all of the organization change we have been discussing, SAIC's tagline says "From Science to Solutions." Do you feel that accurately portrays what SAIC is trying to provide? How does the CTO position help the company make the transition from science to solutions? Alving, I interpret the tagline in perhaps a slightly different way than some people. From science to solutions doesn't necessarily mean that SAIC starts with the science, does the science, takes it through ever-increasing levels of maturity, and eventually brings it into a solution. We do that sometimes, but I think we're actually much stronger when SAIC thinks about all sources of science and technology invention and figures out, how do we turn those inventions into solutions? Those inventions may come from within SAIC, they may come from technology teammates in small companies, they may come from big companies, they may come from universities. And that's why the CTO is the executive sponsor of our University Relations program. We're looking for relationships with universities in part because they're one of the great sources of technology development, and we can help turn those inventions into innovations, into solutions. So the CTOs should be looking at all sources of invention, all sources of new technology, and figuring out how to couple it with another element of our secret sauce, our deep mission or domain expertise. So we're not just technologists inventing a new widget and trying to make people care about it. We're looking at the problems within a mission area, using our domain understanding of how things actually work in that area, looking at inventions, whether they're SAIC invented elsewhere, and figuring out, how do we bring those together using a disciplined process to actually make a solution? And to me, that's what we mean by from science to solutions. Siegel, okay, could you illustrate those points with a collaboration example? Alving, a good example is what we're doing in health information technology. To us, the solution to that problem is not an IT solution on its own. You also have to understand the domain that you're working in. You have to understand why electronic medical records or electronic health records are so complex. You have to understand the medical language and codes that exist in those electronic health records and the multiple translations from one language to another language in order to solve that problem. We were the first, for instance, to connect the DoD, Department of Defense, electronic medical records to the VA, Veterans Administration, medical records and make them talk to each other. We think not just about an IT problem. We think not just about a medical language problem. We think not just about an electronic records problem. We think about all of those things at the same time, as well as the service-oriented architecture to connect those two systems in a flexible and scalable way. So, again, to get to the solution, you need the technology as well as mission domain understanding and a disciplined process to bring it all together. The CTOs are critical to making all of that happen. Siegel, what makes SAIC different from the competition, without revealing any company secrets here? Alving, I think a couple of things make SAIC different. What I just talked about is the intersection of deep technical knowledge with domain and mission understanding, because you can't solve problems, you can't get to the best solutions, having just one or the other. Otherwise, you turn into a technology looking for a problem or a problem with no good way to solve it. Actually, I draw a lot of analogies there to my work at DARPA. It was much the same thing. To invent new programs at DARPA, in my mind, you need to be working on a problem that really matters, understanding all of the constraints and boundaries that go along with that problem, and you have an idea about technologies that could solve that problem. In industry, it's really the same problem, viewed a little bit differently. What makes SAIC so capable is that it has in-house expertise in both the deep technical knowledge over a broad set of different areas, and that domain expertise so that we understand, what problem are we really trying to solve? I would say that another important aspect of SAIC is that we work at the intersection of the physical and the information domains. We have expertise in both, and we really shine when the solution requires both because the dual expertise is pretty rare. There are IT companies, there are physics-based companies. We really have both at scale. For example, in the ISR, intelligence, surveillance and reconnaissance domain, we produce sensors that generate the bits, transfer those bits through networks, wireless or wired, convert the bits into data, into knowledge, and into decisions through the processing, exploitation, and dissemination chain. With a teammate, we developed a brand new type of biological sensor that we called Tiger, Threat ID through genetic evaluation of risk. That technology won the Wall Street Journal Gold Technology Innovation Award in 2009 for the Best Invention of the Year. It relies on a combination of advanced biotech hardware with groundbreaking bioinformatics techniques that were based on our radar signal processing expertise. Information from a sensor like that can feed into our epidemiology and disease tracking work. That's an example of a sensor at the front end through information flow at the back end. In the cybersecurity domain, our subsidiary, Cloud Shield, has a very special piece of hardware that enables real-time, deep packet inspection of network traffic at network line speeds, and that allows you to find cyber threats embedded in the traffic. We build those physical devices into information architectures and services that allow information gathered from a number of different sources and fed back in real time to give a much more proactive, forward-leaning cybersecurity posture. So in a lot of different examples, part of what makes SAIC unique is that we operate at this intersection between the physical and the information. Siegel, okay, so given that uniqueness of SAIC, where do you look to recruit to make those things happen? Chapter 4, People and Customers. Alving, recruiting happens all over the place. Traditionally, the company recruited by luring away the best and the brightest from other companies. Alving, that didn't grow the enterprise. Laughter. Alving, recruiting away from other companies is not a sufficient source of talent moving into the future, in part because we've gotten to be so large that we're now an attractive target for others to recruit from, so that's at best a zero-sum game. But also, if you want to maintain freshness in technology, you've got to make sure you're not only talking to the experienced technologists, but, in fact, you're recruiting those with the freshest ideas, the kids coming out of school, who have been living and breathing social networking, mobile technologies, etc., since they could talk. So, over time, we've been increasing our emphasis on universities. Earlier I mentioned that we look to universities as an important source of technology invention, to make sure we're working with some of the smartest people out there in developing new solutions for our customers. We're also working with universities for recruiting. Over the years, we had a thin stream of students coming in from the universities, but we're recommitting at the enterprise level to really increase that pipeline because we think it's important for our growth, not only in terms of sheer numbers, but also in terms of the diversity of thoughts and ideas and experiences that come with recruiting straight out of college and graduate school. Siegel, switching topics slightly, what do you see as important issues confronting your customers today and also in the future? Alving, certainly money is a concern, whether it's the decreasing budgets or the economy. I think we all recognize that our customers will be trying to do more with less in the future, and we have to help them be successful with that. So as we look at developing solutions, we're very conscious of the cost-effectiveness of the solutions. For defense customers, who are our biggest customers today, they face a lot of changes in force structure, in mission, in their own expectations as we come back from Afghanistan and Iraq. We've got a lot of equipment that was tailored to those particular conflicts. We bought that equipment very quickly, so we didn't have the usual processes in place to figure out how to sustain it and maintain it and figure out how it fits in the bigger picture. So the Defense Department has a number of challenges. I would say for all of our customers and all of us as individuals, we're facing an information deluge, sometimes called a data tsunami. That's true in the ISR realm, where there's a lot more data being generated than people can look at very carefully. But it's true in every other realm, as well. It's true in the health world. As we transition to electronic medical records, that will cause a data tsunami in the medical community. This will be a good thing in the end, but first our customers are going to have to learn how to deal with that data deluge. The same thing is happening in the energy domain. Think about the smart grid. I call the smart grid social networking for the power grid because it's got a lot of distributed sensors networked together. It's going to be information aware, sending a lot of data back and forth. It's going to use real-time data to make decisions, whether at a central command and control level about which assets and resources to bring online or offline, or decisions made by consumers about when to turn on their appliances, whether to buy an electric vehicle, and if so, when and where they recharge it, and so on. This information deluge is facing customers in different ways, but it's here to stay. And related to all that data is the question of cybersecurity. People are starting to become aware that it's an issue. We haven't yet seen the cybersecurity Pearl Harbor, a single event that fundamentally changes people's perspective. But, on the other hand, we see lots of evidence in a lot of different ways that cybersecurity is a problem that we haven't sufficiently solved, and it affects all customers in all domains. It affects all of us. Siegel, How do you help the customers realize that these are things that they have to be worried about as an entry to generating new business? Alving, thought leadership is an important piece of that. We do a lot of educating of the customer. But, frankly, nobody likes to just be told they should be really scared without being offered something to do about it. And on the other hand, if we offer them a solution that they don't think is needed, then that's not going to resonate either. So when we talk to customers, we talk to them about as much as we can, given what the classification level is, about what the threat is, and we also talk to them about what potential solutions are. We try to come to the table with some good news in addition to the bad news. We talk at conferences and discuss, as appropriate for the forum, both why the challenges are real and, again, provide some thoughts about how people might address the problem. Siegel, okay, so to follow up with that, how does SAIC monitor and assess evolving technologies to identify potential applications for expanding business opportunities, products, or services? Alving, SAIC is so broad that's really a contact sport. There are a lot of people involved in it. Nuclear phenomenology is where we got our start many decades ago, and now we cover a huge range of technologies: signal processing, data analytics, neurological and behavioral science, biometrics, cancer, geospatial information, image analysis, positioning including GPS, global positioning system, language translation, high-energy lasers, architectural engineering for complex processing plants, energy efficiency, environmental cleanup, and that's just a piece of it. There's no single go-to source for innovations or for customers. We have a breadth of technology experts in so many different areas. Those people are out there every day not only working in those fields, but making contacts with their peers in other companies, in universities, etc., and staying abreast of what's going on. So the trick is, how do we take that widely distributed set of knowledge and information gathering and connect it in a meaningful way at the enterprise level, so that we're not all running off in different directions? And that gets back to the integrated business planning process, which provides the strategic thought about what direction we're going in and how we get there. That's why the CTOs are so important in that process, because they're the connection between that local, individual technology perspective on where things are going and what it might mean to the company. That needs to feed back into a larger discussion to identify those things across the enterprise that are going to be important, so that, for those enterprise-wide things, we can make the big bets and make sure that they get executed. So, again, the CTOs as a network are important to providing that connectivity, from the front lines of the individual technologies and innovation areas all the way up to the strategic direction of the company. Siegel, okay, let's shift gears. Are there any big technology projects on the horizon now? Alving, one area of focus is on the cloud. When we look at the transformation that's taking place in cloud, we recognize there's a lot of hype. People have been talking about cloud for a couple of years now, and it's gone through its hype cycle and it sort of remains all things to all people. Then people say, wait, does it really mean anything to me? There's no doubt the cloud is coming, for all the reasons that people talk about, including the financial imperative, because it's part of the solution to the budget issues that people are facing. We need a different paradigm for who owns, who operates, and who uses IT. And that's what the cloud offers. It's coming, but for our customers, national security customers and other customers with very sensitive data, we have to address the security question, the data integrity question, both for data at rest and for data on the move. We have to make sure the systems in the cloud are connected in a way that's secure. So that's one of our enterprise priorities, to make sure that we have an offering there that's unique and capable, because, until our customers start to hear a solution they believe is going to satisfy their security requirements, they're not going to move very much to the cloud. We believe that the right answer, again, lies at the intersection between the physical and the information. You cannot solve this problem only by new protocols or new software or new after-the-fact fixes. We believe that there is a hardware component of this, and so we're working with our CloudShield folks to make sure that we get that hardware component right. Our goal is to make sure that a cloud doesn't have to operate either as an efficient cloud or a secure cloud, but, in fact, we can have the efficiencies of the cloud and security at the same time. And here, again, our deep mission experience in protecting highly classified information is critical in our ability to develop these solutions. Siegel, let's talk now about technology investments. You mentioned CloudShield. Are there other examples that illustrate how SAIC invests in technology? Alving, we invest in technology in a couple of ways. We do acquisitions. For example, we did an acquisition of CloudShield. We did an acquisition around the language expertise that I mentioned. But we also do a lot of organic investment. In fact, our CEO believes that organic investment has the highest return on investment, and so we've been making a big push over the last couple of years to increase our investment levels. Since I took over as the CTO, our investments have been rising. The CEO at the time had been putting an emphasis on internal research and development (IR&D) funding. We are on a path towards quadrupling our investment in less than a decade. We also invest in our people. For example, 5 years ago there weren't a lot of people who had cybersecurity degrees or the deep training that you really need to develop cybersecurity solutions. SAIC had not been investing much in that. Now we're investing with university allies to help develop new courses and new degree programs in cybersecurity. We've been hiring out of those programs just as fast as people are coming out. We're also investing in people we already have within SAIC to get them training and qualifications in cybersecurity. So we really look at a mix of different types of investments, and that gets back to this strategic planning process, identifying the gaps and then figuring out the best ways to fill them. Donaldson, as you think through the breadth of the company, its challenges, issues, etc., what keeps you up at night? Alving, well, not much. I mean, honestly. Chapter 5, Identity and Research. Alving, well, yeah, as much as I can. But when I think about that question, I think about something at the national level. I don't know if that's of interest to you? Alving, it's the question of what identity means in the 21st century. If you think about discussions about cybersecurity and privacy, all of that implies that you're keeping private what should be private and allowing to be public what should be public. Security is, in part, helping make private data secure at the same time that you're making public data public. That implies that we have a construct for what is private and what is public that comes from an understanding of what defines an individual's identity, and who owns that. I believe we need a more sophisticated construct of identity for the 21st century, and it probably needs to be not monolithic, but nuanced with various facets for different purposes and different types of information. In the 1970s, identity was about physical presence, and it was pretty much proven with a driver's license. To the extent that there was an electronic identity, people in the U.S. used a social security number. By the way, when that was created, it was explicitly intended not to be an identification number. But as people needed electronic identification, there was nothing else, so it kind of fell into becoming an electronic ID that served to prove the identity of a person. Now we need a new paradigm. We're living in a world where massive amounts of data are being generated, especially personal data of many different types, your health information or your financial or banking data or photos of you, where the data is stored essentially forever, where it's connected through high bandwidth links to essentially everyone, where there are extraordinarily sophisticated analytic tools to analyze all that data. I think these questions, about what is identity, what are its dimensions and who controls them, need to be addressed, and we're not, in my mind, really thinking about the whole problem. We're thinking about pieces of it, like we're thinking about cybersecurity or HIPAA, Health Insurance Portability and Accountability Act, for privacy of medical records. But we're not looking at the whole problem. All data are not created equal, and access to data may be either good or bad, depending on its purpose. It's good for my doctors to share my medical information and for credit agencies to provide financial information if I apply for a loan, but I sure don't want that sharing to get mixed up. That's what I mean when I say there's no monolithic solution. We need something better than a single electronic ID number. And people are contributing to the size of this problem every day through vehicles like Facebook. They're putting a lot of private information out and then coming to the realization that, well, that data lives forever, and if it was an embarrassing photo, maybe that's not so good 20 years later in your life. And what if a friend posts a photo of you on his social networking site? Do you have any rights to control how you're portrayed, forever, in those databases? There are questions like biometrics. I joined the CLEAR program, a biometric identification to bypass long security waits at airports, back when it started. I voluntarily gave up some biometric information about myself to a private company because I travel a lot and the benefit to me was worth the risk. But once they went out of business, who owns my biometric data? There's not really any way to get it back. You also see this question about identity and who owns identity coming up at the intersection of the physical and the information domains again. Recently in the Wall Street Journal, there was an article about technology that comes out of the military community and is now used by the police to track cell phones, not to listen to cell phone conversations but to track where they are, even when they're not in use, by actively pinging cell phones so their location can be triangulated. And that information can be used by the police to find people who own those cell phones. Was that part of their identity? Is that part of who they are, where they are at a particular time as revealed through a physical device? So I think the issue of identity raises profound questions. I don't hear this conversation at the fundamental level on the national stage. We're dealing with issues that arise from it every day, mostly through the courts, but we're doing it in the absence of a larger philosophical construct about what identity means. And I think that construct needs to be created as part of a national conversation that includes the government, includes industry, which uses or generates this information, and includes academia, which can contribute great thinking about where these boundaries should be and what we should value. Alving, yes. And there is a place for not-for-profit organizations and so forth. So that, to me, is a great, unaddressed question. It's far beyond the scope of any one company. I think it affects all of us. Alving, there's another thing I didn't talk about, and I don't know whether it fits into your concept for the book. And that's about being on the board, being a director of a public corporation. Alving, I'm on the board of the Paul Corporation, and I've been on the board for something like 1.5 years now. I bring it up because the reason I was invited to join the board was that this company is a very technology-centric company. They have a core set of technologies around filtration and separation, and they're the largest standalone player in that space right now. Being a very technology-centric company, they decided that they wanted to make sure that the technology core of the company was healthy. So they did two things. They created a corporate-level chief technology officer, which they had not had before, and they went out looking for somebody to put on the board who was a CTO who understands some of the issues that we've been talking about. My participation on the Paul Corporation board is only possible because our CEO supports such outside activities with what he calls 3-2-1. That's a little mantra to remind our senior executives that engagement with the outside world is important. 3-2-1 refers to an annual goal of 3 high-level engagements, 2 speeches, and 1 board participation from each of the senior executives. It's important for leaders to remember that engagement with the outside world is part of what makes us all successful, and that's just as true for CTOs as for other executives. Siegel, Amy, thank you for a great discussion today. Thank you for your time, insights, and participation. Alving, thanks. I enjoyed our conversation. Dr. Donald F. Ferguson is Executive Vice President and Chief Technology Officer at CA Technologies. Tasked with promoting technical excellence at CA Technologies and further developing the company's technical community, Don chairs the company's Architecture Board and a newly formed Distinguished Engineer Board. He also serves on the Executive Leadership Team, which supervises the business and technology strategies for the company as a whole. Before assuming the position of CTO, Don was Corporate Senior Vice President and Chief Architect. In this role, he defined the direction and technical evolution for products. Prior to joining CA Technologies in 2008, Don was a Microsoft Technical Fellow working in the office of the CTO. He worked on various projects exploring the future of enterprise software, with a special emphasis on web services and Internet application platforms. Don began his career at IBM, where he worked for 20 years. In 2001, Don became an IBM Fellow, IBM's highest technical honor. IBM has approximately 50 IBM Fellows in their 150,000-person engineering team. Scott Donaldson, so let's begin with your journey here to the CTO position. How did you get to be CTO? Don Ferguson, that's a good question. It wasn't my cunning plan. I got a Ph. in computer science from Columbia University, and when you did that back in 87, 88, you went one of two places: you went to become a professor or you went to an industrial research center. I didn't want to have to deal with the stress of trying to get tenure and getting funding, so I went to IBM Research, which is about 40 miles from Columbia. And a lot of people from IBM Research took courses at Columbia, so I had connections there, and I was a summer student and an intern there during most of my PH. So I joined IBM Research, and I did research on various projects. I wrote papers. It was industrial research. Then IBM had the near-death experience, and they concluded that one of the causes was that research was not linked enough with products and product development. My favorite example of that was that IBM invented RISC technology. IBM invented relational databases. IBM was the last company that had relational databases on RISC technology. There's something wrong with this picture. So I pitched in and worked on advanced technology for products. My philosophy was just to grab an oar and row. And my work made a difference because of the group I was in. I actually worked on modern mainframe software despite the fact that working on mainframe projects made you look like a troglodyte in academic research. But there was actually some interesting research. I actually got 2 or 3 papers and patents out of it. And it was kind of funny at that time because before the death experience, when you would go to a meeting, all of the people from the products team would have jackets and ties and all of the research guys would be like in business casual. And the company had concluded that product research needed to be more helpful to product development, needed to be more like Silicon Valley. So after that, whenever you went to a meeting, people from the research division would be in a suit and tie and people from product development would be in business casual. Chapter 6: Ferguson and People. So I did a couple of projects on the mainframe, and they were quite successful actually. And that was the thing that, using a mafia term, that made my bones. I did some technology back then that helped us sell mainframes because of the extended storage architecture, and then I worked on transaction management, and as we transitioned from really fast bipolar uniprocessor to parallel, large memory mainframe systems. I actually got a paper and patent out of that one, so there was really a lot of innovation there. Then IBM was getting a lot of investment in distributed Unix RISC system /6000, so I started running some projects on distributed systems management for a commercial data processing systems. It was Power Parallel System v2. So we were doing this type of project. We had produced some frameworks to do a highly productive system infrastructure using distributed object technology. I used to present to the executives. So periodically, executives from product teams would come in and go, "Hey guys, show us what we're getting from research." And one of the executives, Irving Ladowski-Berger, brought in as CIO, Barry Lin, who was the CIO of Wells Fargo. And before the meeting, Barry sent a question: "We're trying to solve this problem. Can you tell us how you'd do it?" I thought about it and I came in and presented how we would do it with our technology. And they loved it, so that created a project called First of a Kind. Research used to do first of a kind with customers. We would work on this idea with a customer and then it would evolve into a product. It was really kind of successful. The executives would come in and I'd go, "Your current approach to distributed objects process doesn't make sense. Here's an example of something we're doing that does make sense." I do this all the time. So one day I'm sitting in my office fat, dumb, and happy. Two guys walk into my office, Mark Bilger and Mark Wegman, who eventually became an IBM fellow. And they said, "Come with us," which I found vaguely ominous. I said, "Where are we going?" They said, "Come with us." And then we got in the car. It was getting worse. Where are we going? Somewhere. Okay, it could be worse. It could be a dumpster in Jersey. Ferguson, Summers was the IBM business unit headquarters. We go in and I walk in an office and saw Robert LeBlanc, who was in charge of a lot of the application development in middleware. Robert said to me, "Yesterday we transitioned the object technology over to me. And I want you to come in and be the technical lead for turning your ideas into products." Ferguson, and I said to him, "Robert, I'm not sure that's such a good idea, 'cause I'm a research guy. I don't have product experience and my wife's having a baby in a month." So he said, "Oh, okay. So you just shoot your mouth off. You don't actually do anything, do you?" At which point I responded, "Screw you. I'm on the job." So we pulled together a team of 5 or 6 people to find what we could do based on what we had been doing, and that project became an IBM product, a product that started WebSphere. When I started that project, we started it with 5 people. When I left IBM about 10 years later, there were 5,000 people working on WebSphere and it was $1 billion business. Donaldson, that's fascinating. I did a little of the research on that work and I coined a new phrase for you, parents of WebSphere. This team did some remarkable work. One of the things that we were curious about is what was really unique about this team. How did they come together? What made it click to go from 5 people to 5,000? Ferguson, after WebSphere started to take off, it eventually became a multi-million-dollar business. At one point WebSphere was the fastest growing product in IBM history. There was a magazine that came out, WebSphere Developers Journal, and marketing decided that the first issue of WebSphere Developers Journal should be an interview with the father of WebSphere. And so they were going to interview me. And the first thing I said during the interview is, I said, "I don't like the title of father of WebSphere. I have 2 daughters. I'm their father, not WebSphere's. And victory has 1,000 fathers, defeat is an orphan." And they said, "Well, that's nice, but we're going to sell more magazines if we say the father of WebSphere, plus marketing said it was going to be the father of WebSphere, so shut up." So people often ask me, How did WebSphere succeed? And I will say 3 things. The first one is that at that time and even now, there was a small group of executives that were running the software group that were, in my opinion, some of the best executives in the software industry: Steve Mills, Danny Sabat, Robert LeBlanc, John Swainson, who used to be the CEO of CA, and Buj Goyal. There's no executive software management team in the world that's better than these guys. And they were willing to take technology risks. Danny Sabat and Buj Goyal were also from the research division. They were executives in research. They were good technologically. Steve Mills came up through sales and marketing, but he has an eerie ability to understand the technology and how it's going to help customers. It's spooky. The guy's not an engineer. He never studied computer science. But Steve has an awesome gift. Ferguson, and John Swainson was the same. When John Swainson retired from CA, we actually voted him Distinguished Engineer Emeritus, which is the CA equivalent of an IBM Fellow. At IBM there was a cluster of executives who were deeply technical, who were willing to take risks, had the courage to take risks, and understood that we needed to do this. John Swainson helped build a similar team at CA Technologies, which is why the company has become amazingly innovative. Bill McCracken is another example. Bill spent his career in sales and management in IBM. Bill majored in physics in college and started as a systems engineer in IBM. I love having technology conversations with Bill. David Dobson, Ajay Gopal, my former manager, Russ Arzt, Jacob Lamb, Peter Griffiths, Adam Elster, and the others. The second thing is, if you talk to any senior military leader, they will tell you that the backbone of the Marine Corps is the non-commissioned officers and the junior officers. Ferguson, there was a nucleus of technical leaders, senior engineers, STSMs, distinguished engineers, etc., and we basically held that organization together. We collectively made decisions that were in the best interests of the IBM software group and company. Not individual and parochial interests. It was, product development managers. Product managers will tend to make parochial decisions. It's not that they're bad people. It's just their perspective. Ferguson, but there was this core of people who STSMs, DEs worked together and pushed decisions that were right for the company as a whole. The analogy is, my father was in the Marines and he was in an air wing. He became a sergeant and was an ordnance man. Dad taught me how to make booby traps, but let's not go there. Donaldson, Semper Fi. Yeah, I was in the Corps. Ferguson, I wasn't, because I grew up during Vietnam and my father said, "You're not going into the Marines." I always regret that I didn't. Anyway, but Marines are obsessed with using Marine Close Air Support. They don't want it from anybody else, and the reason is that the first lieutenant that is rolling in on the target probably knows the first lieutenant who's commanding the platoon and calling in the airstrike. Ferguson, the pilot's not going to let that guy down. Ferguson, so, anyway, managers came and managers went, and we were reorged again. I worked with the same technical guys, Tom Story, Tim Holloway, Rob High, Jerry Cuomo, Eric Hernus, Martin Nally for years. They were my brothers in arms. I would do anything for them and vice versa. Donaldson, so these folks made decisions to advance shareholder value for the whole corporation. They had that thought in mind? Ferguson, yep. We were a team, and no matter how the company reorged, it was the same people. We'd be in different roles, but we were a team. We were the constant. And then the third thing for our success was communication. I am with customers all the time. So unlike a lot of technical people and many engineers in development, I spend as much time with customers as I can. Every good idea I ever had I've stolen from a customer. Ferguson, now, so WebSphere sprang out of this, partly out of this conversation with Barry Lynn and then a couple of others. It's kind of funny. Barry Lynn retired and then he went into the VC, virtual cloud, business and he became the CEO of a company 3Terra, that we acquired about 2 years ago when cloud wasn't an easy thing to explain, but Barry explained it to me. I got it, and I drove, and I gave a presentation to the executive leadership team, and it clicked. The acquisition was a gutsy, technology-driven call that Bill McCracken, Jacob Lamb, Russ Arzt, and others made. I will always admire that call. 3Terra AppLogic is now at the heart of everything we're doing in cloud computing. Chapter 7, People and Management. Donaldson, let's shift gears just a little and talk about what you do day to day. What are your main responsibilities? Who do you report to? Who reports to you? Where do you spend your time? Do you spend your time mainly on management, administrative, communications, research, getting out with the customers? Those sorts of things. Ferguson, I am the worst manager and administrator in the world. It's important to know your strengths and weaknesses. And my goal in life is to not be a manager. There have been many people who have come to me and said, I'd like to come and report to you. I say, well, I don't hate you, so I don't think that's a good idea. So I take a step back and I think about what I do, and I do 5 things. The first thing is advise and consent on the design and implementation of our products. I advise which features should go into products, how we should build them, where they should go. And I consent to the design, to make sure it's a good design and it winds up with basic principles, etc. Advice and consent, we have a review process for that. We call it the Architecture Technical Review. We did that in IBM. When I became an IBM Fellow, I moved up and was the chief architect for the IBM software group as a whole. About 2 days after that, I get called in to review a project to build a B2B business system based on WebSphere and software group products. It took 14 physical machines to build and run the Hello World business process. I didn't know what the right answer was, but I knew it was less than 14. When I left, it would all run on a ThinkPad. It was a big ThinkPad, but it would all run on a ThinkPad. And that was all just advice and consent, and the fact that when I gave advice and consent, my technical colleagues would hash it out and figure out how to do it, then it was game time. Let's go and let's do it. Ferguson, in the entire time I was the chief architect for Software Group, I only once in 4 years had to say the words, I've heard all the people, but we're going to do it this way. We would talk about it, we would form a consensus, and then we would go. And I only held a vote in the Software Group Architecture Board once. It was a disaster, because I asked what we were going to do. Are we going to do Xforms or Java server faces with tag libraries? I wrote it on the board, and I went around voting, and everybody suggested another option. And I said, you don't understand. You get to vote for one of these two. There were no write-in candidates in this election. We were able to make it happen. In Software Group, I called the architecture reviews a peer review, which had all your peers and colleagues look at your design and make suggestions and hash it out. It was meant to be very collegial. I wanted to be like that here because CA never had that before. When John Swainson was asking me to come here, I asked him, well, how do you do your architectural reviews? He said, we don't. I was like, what do you mean you don't? You must. Then we had this conversation for about 5 minutes, and he said, look, Don, focus. We don't do it. I was like, okay. But it's advice and consent. Ferguson, the second one is innovation. My folksy story for that is, product management, competitive analysis, these things are all important for marketing, market intelligence. But in 1880, if you did standard product management, market analysis for illumination, you would have gotten cheaper candles, scented whale oil. Ferguson, you wouldn't have gotten light bulbs. It's my job to figure out what the light bulbs are. And so we actually have a couple of projects that I think are revolutionary that we showed at CA World 2011 in November. It's partly my job looking for innovation. Donaldson, so how do you do that? Your focus appears to be on reaching out to the customers and the community, your peers within the industry, sitting down and just thinking, what takes us to the next level? Ferguson, knowing your personal strengths and weaknesses, this is one of the most important things that people should know. And I have 3 gifts, and they're gifts. I don't know where they came from, but the first one is I have an eerie ability to look at a complex environment and figure out how to build a system that will solve it. I don't know where that comes from. I look at it, and it comes. It's spooky. I have an eerie ability to pick things up. People will come in and will start talking to me about the system they're building or something, and 3 minutes into it, I can explain to them, you must be building this way or doing that. And it's a gift. The second gift is that I can ask myself extreme questions. An example is one of the last products we did when I was at IBM was something called WebSphere Extended Deployment. And we had all this complicated load balancing, cluster support stuff with WebSphere. And it was really good stuff. I mean, it was one of the competitive advantages. But one day I was thinking, and I said, what would we do if hardware were free? And the answer was, we wouldn't do what we were doing. You've got a performance problem? Instead of doing spooky load balancing, just throw hardware at it. And that question, what would we do if hardware were free, that was where WebSphere ED came from. One of the innovative products that we're doing at CA Technologies is intuitive, model-based IT management. If you look at our products, you'll see over again icons connected by lines, and then you can click on an icon and get a property sheet up. Wow, that looks like PowerPoint. What would the world look like if you could manage IT with PowerPoint and clip art? That's where the model-driven design came from. I'll look at a problem and I'll think about it for a second, and I'll say, there is a problem in a completely different domain, and if you apply the principles from that problem to this one, this is what you'll get. An example is people will say, a 10x improvement in IT management? That's not possible. And my response is, well, relational databases did it for data. Why can't we do it for IT management? How did they do it? They did it in domain-specific languages for data management. And the third gift I have is for understanding a business problem, converting it into technology, and then explaining back to business people in business terms. I don't know where that came from. And I'm just very grateful for those gifts. Whenever I see something new, my first reaction is, how do I make money with this? How I do make it a good idea. It's never, is this a good idea? My job is to make it work. If somebody came to me and presented some story about a new technology for getting chickens to lay more eggs, my job would be to figure out how to use it to make more money for CA. Now we will go and do the next step, which is the pro and con analysis. It's my job to make it work. When people tell me something won't work, I'll say, why? The most common answer is, we tried it before and it didn't work. My response is, well, if we gave up every time something didn't work, we wouldn't have fire. We'd be wet and cold in a cave, eating rocks. So we're going to try again. And the second thing is, you don't understand. It's your job. You don't know it won't work until you try. Donaldson, so advice and consent, innovation, make things work. Ferguson, right. Well, innovation is part of making things work. Ferguson, number 3 is consult with business executives. We're inherently a technology company. Technological considerations factor into our business decisions. I'm their trusted advisor on technology. Number 4 is care and feeding of the technical team. Although some CTOs actually are also the VP of engineering, I'm not. All the engineers are in line development organizations. They have management chains. I have an ethical responsibility to support those people. To be somebody they can come to when they have a problem. I've often told people, anyone, any technical professional, in any part of CA can come to me at any time for any reason and I will try to help them. I may not be able to, but that's my job. Ferguson, not as much as you might think. Because for reasons that I don't completely understand, many people have told me that I'm scary and unapproachable. I'm not quite sure why, but they don't. Chapter 8, People and Problem. When I was going through a leadership development program, they do these 360 reviews. And one of the questions was, is Don helpful when you come to him with a problem? And there were like 20 respondents. A 5 rating was the most helpful person I've met. 1 was completely useless. 10 people rated me 5 and 10 people rated me 1, and the guy who was coaching it said, I've never seen anything like this. How is it possible? And I said, 10 of the people came to me, and 10 of them haven't yet. Both laughing, I went out to dinner with my family, and we were sitting down at the table and there was a box where you could take questions out to stimulate conversations, which I actually thought was kind of pathetic, that you would need a box with your family to stimulate conversation. Using a box to stimulate conversation is solving the wrong problem. And my daughter took out a card and said, what one word would most people use to describe you? And she thought for a minute and said, for me I don't know what it is, but for Dad it would be dangerous. I nearly fell on the floor. Ferguson, giving an example, in IBM and in CA Technologies, I hold office hours. I'm on the phone for an hour at least once a week. Anyone can call in and talk about anything they want. If we were all on one site, I would just sit in my office, but I have telephone office hours. I blog. I write an internal blog, which people tell me is great. I have been giving webcasts on various topics. And I've been getting one most of the time when somebody gives a webcast, it's only 50, 100 people. I routinely get over 1,000. So when we had switched strategy, we were starting to focus on virtualization in cloud. My manager called me in my office and said, Don, we've got to get this done in 6 months. You've got to quarterback this. We've got to get this done by CA World. So I started reviewing the project. I'm talking to these guys, Kouros Esfahani and Greg Bodine. I mean, these guys are as good as anyone I've ever known. I realized 2 hours into the meeting that they've got this situation under control. I said, you don't really need me to quarterback, do you? They said, no. Oh, okay. Now my job is to block for you. Donaldson, yeah, so they can get it done. Ferguson, and even some of it is just mundane stuff. I was on a call and somebody said, well, you know, we want to have a design meeting on the portal, but because we're getting to the end of the quarter, we have a travel freeze. I said, well, you should take the trip. I'll pay for it out of my budget. And if I can't, I'll pay for it with my personal credit card. Ferguson, the next one is communication, both internal and external. I give a lot of keynotes at conferences. I do the internal webcasts. The internal communication is important. Every single day, every engineer in this company is going to make 2 or 3 decisions. Our technology development group has 5,000 people. That's 15,000 decisions in a day. I can't review all of those. They need to know the play. They need to be in the huddle, because there are a number of things that break because not everybody was in the huddle. And then there is communication with customers, visits, conference keynotes, etc. We need to understand and explain where the world is going. So communication, care and feeding of the technical team, executive advice, innovation, and governance are all important. Donaldson, do you ever have an opportunity to get the technology people together? Ferguson, yes, we do it several ways. One way is through site visits, and I do town halls there. We also have an architects conference where 200 people come together every year. We have an organization called the Council for Technical Excellence, which spans the company and meets once a year. We get them together. Periodically, we have meetings. Donaldson, so, given all that, how do you define success for yourself? When you get something to the market, or you've helped somebody solve through a very complicated problem? Ferguson, that's a really good question. It varies tremendously from topic. Whenever I review something, whenever I suggest something, I almost always focus on 3 observations. If you do fewer than 3, you're not trying. If you do more than 3, he who tries to do everything fails. Whether it's a customer problem, a product we're trying to build, a business problem we need to solve, a competitive situation. I pick 3 things. And the success is, did we do the 3 things or not? But they can be anything that's relevant to the problem at hand. Ferguson, but I do have a list of goals. These are the things I want to get done. I just bang against the goals. But the most important thing is, the key to happiness in life is lowered expectations. You know, if I have 100 thing. That is the heart of CTOs at Work. If it helped, a quick subscribe keeps more summaries coming. So how do technology and people connect? That is exactly where we started. Go back to the top and watch it click into place.